And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another special off-season edition of the Assembly Call. We are gathered here this evening to discuss a busy off-season in Bloomington. It's the off-season, but there's never a dull moment with Indiana basketball, even when it seems like you're going to be able to take a step back, not pay attention for a little while. There's always stuff going on, whether it's recruiting news, whether it's NBA Draft Combine news, whether it's comments from Tom Crean, whatever it is, or just looking ahead to next season. There is always something interesting to talk about, and so that's why we have convened this episode of the Assembly Call to do just that. I am your host, Jared Morris. Very excited to be here with you tonight or on the podcast whenever and wherever you are listening to this episode of the Assembly Call. I'm joined tonight by our usual crew. We have Will DeWitt here, we have Ryan Phillips here, and we are hoping to be joined by the king of bracketology himself, Andy Bottoms, but he had some family commitments that may keep him away from the entire episode, or he may be able to pop in a little bit later, so we will hope to see Andy to get his thoughts on the Hoosiers as well. But with that said, let's hop right into tonight's episode, and let's start out, like we always do, going around the horn. And I'll begin with my banner moment. And my banner moment for right now is really just kind of how this offseason has gone. Because to me, the way this offseason has gone for Indiana basketball is the way that an offseason goes for a great college basketball program. And what I mean by that is we're not seeing a lot of the negative turmoil that we've seen in the past, whether it be fans questioning coaches' job security, whether it be transfers, whether it be, off-the-court incidents, anything like that. There really hasn't been any negative news for Indiana basketball, and instead what we're seeing is the kind of stuff that you see at elite basketball programs, which is guys having to make stay or go decisions, and some guys deciding to stay, some guys putting their names into the NBA draft. So there's NBA Combine news, there's talks of players from last year's team making visits, there's recruiting news. And in addition to Indiana getting a late commitment from a guy like Freddie McSwain, you have Indiana's name all over the place with high-profile recruits in 2017, 2018. And so coming off a season that started out poorly but really stabilized and turned into a Big Ten championship-type season, this is exactly what you want to see in the offseason, which is a continuation of that positive momentum. Because what we've wanted from Indiana basketball is to get some stability, but not just stability in a mediocre sense. We want stability going from good to great, hopefully up to elite, but maintaining that and just taking steps up along the way. And that's what it feels like this offseason has been about. And so I think for that reason, to me, it suggests that Indiana basketball continues to be on the right track, which it has seemed like it's been here for a little while now. And so I take that as a big positive, and that to me is the banner moment and why I'm feeling pretty good. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of time left in the offseason, and so one thing that we've learned about this program is sometimes when things seem as good as they can be, the other shoe will drop and something bad can happen, and vice versa has been true as well. When things seem like they've been as bad as they can be, good things then come around the corner. So we will see. But so far, so good. Hopefully the offseason continues right along that way. All right, let's go around the horn. Ryan, we will go to you first. Do you have anything to rant about in the midst of this otherwise positive offseason?
I'm going to rant about you just jinxing the positive offseason.
Damn it.
If anything happens from now on, that's the guy you blame. Actually, he's like, I guess on your screen, he's like over here. Thanks, Jared. Really appreciate that. Smooth sailing all offseason. Jared Morris points it out, and it's over. When you're pitching a no-hitter, you don't mention it to anybody.
That's a fair point.
But to be fair, now that you've let the snake out of the box, I can talk about it now. It has been a really smooth offseason. I think that Indiana has definitely reestablished itself on the national scene with recruits, with the success this year. You said it was a Big Ten championship type season. No, it was just a Big Ten championship season, Jared.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep reminding everybody of that until October when the season tips off. But yeah, I just think that you feel like this is normalized again, like things have sort of stabilized. Now, of course, that's typically when we get the rug pulled out from under us, but right now it looks like smooth sailing, and it seems like everybody who's coming back has seriously bought in and is really looking forward to next year. The fact that Thomas Bryant didn't even entertain the NBA draft, and the fact that OG Anunoby didn't entertain it and just said, hey, no, we're not even going to the Combine. We are committed, and we are coming back. and focused on next year and focused on being sophomores and making this team better. There just wasn't the turnover that we've seen recently. There still is some time before the season, so you're not sure if maybe one or another person will bolt. But it looks like the guys we thought we were going to lose and who we were planning to lose are the guys you're going to lose, and the guys who are coming back and the guys who are coming in are going to be there. And it just looks like a solid situation for Indiana basketball. It looks like they're adding talent instead of subtracting and replacing talent. So I'm really excited for the way things look. I'm excited for these incoming freshmen and junior college transfer Freddie McSwain to get on campus, start working with the team, start working with the athletic staff. And as we've seen, that staff last year made some guys into really good basketball players and really good athletes, guys who maybe struggled with stuff like Thomas Bryant, who was really stiff, wound up becoming an excellent basketball player very quickly and really changing his game in just a span of a few months. So I'm really excited to see what these guys can do once they're on campus, and I think every other Hoosier fan is too, because this is a really nice group coming in, and I know we'll talk about that.
And you've become known for your patented off-season scouting reports of incoming Indiana players, and you were early on OG Anunoby. You talked about his talent last year before the season even started, and I believe you have scouting reports for us later in this episode of the incoming Hoosiers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do, and the thing about OG and what I said was, and I was saying this probably last spring, I was saying that nobody in that recruiting class had improved as much as he had over the last 2 years. Nobody. And I also said he was the most underrated recruit in America. And then in the fall, I said I thought he could contribute this year. Now, look, broken clocks are right twice a day. But at the same time, I typically am pretty good with this stuff. I also said I thought Thomas Bryant would have a really big impact offensively last year once he got settled. And I think that came true as well. So, yeah, I do tend to watch a lot of these guys play and get a good feel for them. And I think that I've got a pretty good handle on the incoming class. And I'm really excited about it. Even though it's not ranked as a top 10 class by a lot of places, I think they added a lot of really good, nice pieces that can really, strengthen what we've already got on that roster.
Very nice. So we look forward to that. We'll get to that probably here in about 25, 30 minutes or so after we break down some other important topics. But before we do that, Will, let's go over to you. There wasn't a game, but you still have a stat of the night for us.
Yeah, my stat of the night is going to be 4. Now you're probably thinking, why is 4 so significant? Well, that's the number of players who received their degrees since the season's end. You have Yogi, Nick, Cowan, and Jackson Tharp. And academic success and ultimately graduating players has kind of been an Indiana staple since the days of Bob Knight. So I just kind of wanted to highlight the academic achievements of these 4 Hoosiers because, as much as we like to see what they can do on the court, what they do in the classroom is equally as important.
Very good. No, that's great, Will. And obviously there was a picture that circulated of 6 guys with caps and gowns on. Troy Williams hasn't yet graduated. I think he has a couple classes and an internship left to complete. And then Max Bielfeldt, as he told us when we interviewed him on Podcast on the Brink, still has a few online classes to do, but those guys certainly on track to graduate as well. So from an academic standpoint, the Hoosiers continue to do what we all hope that they will do and make us proud that way. So that is wonderful. So I want to share with you guys a quick story. Just this past weekend, Heather and I, my beautiful wife, we decided to go see a baseball game. And so she is 7 months pregnant currently. So we do have a little one coming here in a couple of months, which I'm very excited about. And so we decided that before she gets any more pregnant, we should try to get out, do a few things. So we decided to go to a baseball game. Went online to get tickets to a Rangers game here in Dallas, and of course went and used SeatGeek, our sponsor here on the Assembly Call. And so I was looking up tickets and found a couple of tickets that each said $45 each. And so I went in, I purchased them, I went to the checkout, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the ticket price, and it's got the price listed and then all these extra fees for tax, and then there was a seller's fee and a couple other things. And I'm thinking, dang. I was like, I've been coming on here on SeatGeek talking about how the price that you see when you're looking is the same price that you get once you go to the checkout page. And I'm like, I've been misleading people. But then I actually looked at the number, and the total price, so I think it was $88.43. So the original ticket said $45 a piece, and we were getting 2 tickets. And the final price was actually less than that. So it did include all the fees, everything like that. But what's great is that it actually overestimated it. So when I got to the checkout page, I was pleasantly surprised, and we even paid less than what we were expecting for those tickets. And so that is my segue into telling you that for any of your ticket needs this summer, even into next basketball season, whether you're looking for tickets to the Indy 500, any baseball games, the Cubs and Sox, both having big seasons, if you want to go check them out, use SeatGeek, because not only will the price perhaps be less when you get to the checkout than what it says. They've got the great deal rater, so you can see how good of a deal the tickets are. And then, of course, by using the promo code ASSEMBLY when you sign up, ASSEMBLY, and you can use that whether you sign up with the app or whether you sign up on the website. There's a place to enter the promo code. Just look for it in your account section. And again, it's ASSEMBLY. They will give you a $20 rebate on your tickets. Heather and I got ours because we had just signed up for a new account when we did that, and so it all worked out great. So again, SeatGeek, use them. They support our show, and not only do we like supporting them in return, but we actually use them, and they work really well, exactly as advertised. Better than advertised, I guess you could say. Alrighty, so let's jump into talking about this offseason. And before we look ahead to next season, let's talk real quick about probably the biggest story currently circulating around Indiana basketball, and that's the status of Troy Williams. And Troy Williams obviously just participated in the NBA Draft Combine. He has until May 25th to declare whether he will stay or go. And a lot of us have thought that this was a foregone conclusion. I mean, we talked during the season that it seemed like it was kind of a foregone conclusion. We all expected that would be Troy's last season. Nothing really has happened in the offseason to make us think otherwise until a couple days ago when you started to see Troy talk more about it being 50-50. Some comments from Boo Williams that came out that really seemed to suggest that they were evaluating the options more than it may have seemed. And certainly the scouting reports on Troy's performance at the NBA Combine haven't been as positive as he would have liked or as we would have liked as Indiana fans and Troy fans who root for the guy. He, of course, is still saying that teams are telling him he could be a first-round pick, so who knows? The truth may be somewhere in the middle there. Ryan, what are your thoughts? I mean, does Troy Williams to you seem like a guy who will stay in the NBA draft? Should he stay in the NBA draft? And how big of a loss would it be for Indiana if he does decide that he doesn't want to spend his final year in Bloomington?
Well, look, from Troy Williams' perspective, I totally get why going to the NBA would be attractive right now, or just going to play professional basketball. I mean, look, it's not the 1980s or early 90s. Going to play in Europe is not a bad option for a player. You can make millions of dollars over there, doing very well, make a great living, and quite frankly, that's better than digging ditches. So, not that that's the other option, but I'm just saying. I mean, it's not a rough life. So I get why Troy would want to go. Most of his friends are going to be gone. Colin Hartman's the only guy that's his age, really, that's going to be around. It's going to be a much younger team, a team with experience, but a younger team. It's just not the guys he's hung out with. He'll likely be graduated, I think, by this summer. I think it's looks like he needs to do. I think we said he needs to do an internship. But it looks like he's basically graduated and done with school. It's not like he can start a master's if he comes back, I guess. But, so it's sort of like he's been there. He started for 3 years, and he's also been through a lot. It probably seems to him like he's been in college for 6 years, just with everything he's gone through with the turnover and the different teammates and people coming and going. So I get, the fatigue of sort of being in the same place for that long. As far as what would be best for him, clearly after the NBA Draft Combine, I think coming back to school would be best for him because he did not perform well. We all know he's super athletic, and he's got some things that I'm sure will wow NBA scouts and have wowed NBA scouts. But he's also did not perform very well. He was among a huge list of guys who were at the Combine who did not play well. So especially when you look at the international guys who are going to be involved who weren't at the Combine and do have solid grades and who teams can draft and just stash over there for a few years, it's a different situation these days than it was before, where you could be a decent college basketball player and get drafted. Can't do that anymore. You got to be really good to get drafted and get paid. And so I think that the best thing for Troy would be to come back to school. Now, for Indiana, with the scholarship situation right now, after signing Freddie McSwain, it might not be the best thing for Indiana for Troy Williams to come back, because then you've got to jettison somebody. And you've got to let somebody go. And I don't want to speculate on that. I think that's wrong to do, who it would be or what are we going to do and all that. That hasn't happened yet. It's not time to talk about that. but it would be a rough situation if Troy did come back and you have to get rid of somebody, or you have to, release one of your signed guys you've signed to a letter of intent. Troy is a great player at times. He is an all Big Ten caliber player at times. Other times he really hurts the team, as we've talked about many times on this show. I think for his development, he should continue playing in college, but I'm not sure how that advances things for the team.
So let's talk about the impact actually on the floor, Ryan, because the way that I look at it, again, Indiana's not going to lose anything when we're talking about bad Troy. Clearly not having Troy on the road at Michigan State isn't going to impact Indiana because Troy hasn't played well at Michigan State. But there are plenty of other games. You think about the Notre Dame game. You think about the second half of North Carolina where Troy kind of single-handedly kept Indiana breathing in that game. And, so there are times when he plays like that. And I guess, what I fear about next year's team is, this year you had guys like Yogi and guys like Troy that were so good at kind of getting their own offense. And there are certain times when, in certain games against certain teams when you need to be able to do that. And Troy, for all his faults, could get to the basket. He was a guy who drew attention from the defense. And that's one worry I have about next year's team is, obviously the leadership void, that not having Yogi there, that's going to be big. But then also just the void of who's the go-to guy. And we know Thomas Bryant is going to be the go-to guy down low, but who's the go-to ball handler? And clearly you have guys like Robert Johnson and James Blackman Jr. who could pick up that slack. But I wonder if having that element of Troy, being able to penetrate, being able to get it and go, being able to create offense for himself and others when things get bogged down, and that double whammy of not having Yogi and then not having Troy as well, I wonder how much that's going to hurt a team that has been offensively so built around being able to do exactly that. How much do you think that will hurt Indiana not having that, and do you think the guys who are here can pick up that slack without him?
Well, one thing you have to say about Troy Williams, good or bad, the man was not shy, and he would go at the rim at any time if he had a sliver of an opening. He could cut back door. He can create offense, and that's what you're talking about, I believe. He just created offense out of nothing sometimes, and Yogi could do that too. Luckily, as you said, now you've got Thomas Bryant in the post who can do that as well. You throw the ball to him, even if he has bad position or something, he's talented enough to make something happen and get to the basket and score. That will take some of the pressure off. You saw that in the Kentucky game late in the second half. Thomas Bryant just owned that game, and that was maybe the perfect example of what he should be next year, as a guy who can take over. And I think he wants to do that, which for a freshman was amazing this year, for a freshman to want that role. And I think he will embrace that going into his second season. If he was embracing that as a freshman, he's really going to be, on fire to do it as a sophomore. So I think you can get points that way there. I agree with you. I think that it's going to be difficult because a lot of the guys you have coming back are shooters more than they are scorers. And Troy was that guy who was kind of could stir the drink at times and mix it up and get to the rim. Even if he didn't have anything there. The problem is, as you said, you also had to deal with bad Troy, who, dribbled the ball off his leg out of bounds as much as he would get to the rim and lay it in. And so I think that it is an interesting question. And if you could get Troy to find some consistency, as we did see at times. We saw a couple games in a row this year where he had that consistency of being able to score, not firing bad shots, not just driving into nowhere. If you can get that from him, yeah, you want him back. But if it's going to be up and down Troy, who you can't rely on, and you can't, plan around having a certain specific set of things he'll accomplish every game, then it might be better to just turn the page and move on. And that's not a knock on Troy. That's just sort of, it might actually hurt his draft stock if he comes back and doesn't develop even more. That might sink him even more. Because now you could say, well, if you just find some consistency for him, but if he's in his fourth year of showing no consistency, I think that will hurt him as well. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's you hate to lose a guy with that, insane ceiling, but at the same time, not having him might stabilize things more and get you to rely on other people as well. So it's a really tough position to be in to try and evaluate because you don't know which guy you're getting every day. I will say this about Troy, and I thought late in the season his defense improved tremendously. And he did a much better job defensively, and that was something that had been a mess for 2 3/4 years of his career, and I thought he really focused on that and got better late.
Yeah, from the Michigan State game on, he was really good. I mean, he was playing at an all Big Ten level. Will, you've got some numbers.
I do, and they're actually going to complement this discussion you guys had quite well, so that's exciting. You talked about the bad Troy. Well, what exactly would we actually kind of gain by losing bad Troy? Well, he accounted for nearly 20% of the turnovers last year. 93 of the 474 turnovers, that was 19.6%. So obviously, if we gain, that many possessions back, that's going to obviously improve our offense. And then on top of that as well, you asked Jared, you got to find, the next go-to guy. And I had that in my notes too, like who's going to be the next go-to guy, because Troy was used 26.3% of the possessions last season, which was second on the team, but it was first for guys who played the entire season. It was actually Blackman Jr. who had 27%. So perhaps, like you said, maybe he's the guy. And then where I think his impact's going to be missed the most, you guys kind of talked about offense, and Ryan, you mentioned defense right before you ended. I think it's really going to be on defense, because on defense, and especially on the boards, he led the team with 154 defensive rebounds. He led the team with 204 total rebounds, and then you have those impact plays. He led the team with steals with 39, and then he was also second on the team with 28 blocks. So I think just all of that, together on defense, we're going to have to find, OG's going to have to step up there with those blocks. We're going to have to see some more of that, because there's a lot of those impact plays that Troy makes on both ends, and I think it's going to be hard to replace that. But then again, with the turnovers, maybe we break even. It's one of those things that it can kind of go either way.
It really can, and that's what makes this such a complicated discussion. For those who are overly frustrated by bad Troy and ready to say good riddance, there's a lot of evidence, as was just presented, that Indiana's really going to miss Troy. And yet, for those who are maybe too apologetic for Troy's mistakes, you look at some of the efficiency numbers and you say, hey, if we can put some of those possessions into the hands of guys who are more efficient, like our big man who shoots 70% from down low, then maybe the net gain is positive. We won't know until it gets there. And of course, the other factor to remember is that we're losing a senior, and we're losing a guy who's been around the program, who learned a tough lesson as a freshman when, of course, he failed that drug test, and had a great quote afterwards about learning what it meant to be a Hoosier, what it means to be a Hoosier, and really seemed to be a guy who matured as he went through the program and obviously put himself in a good position academically. And anytime you lose those guys that are upperclassmen, that are going to be able to show the younger guys the ways, not just on the court, but off the court as well, that can hurt your culture a little bit. And when you're losing a guy like Yogi and leaders like Nick Zeisloft and Max Bielfeldt, that's the other thing I worry about a little bit, is there's going to be a lot of talent on next year's team, but there's not now as much experience going through the big battles on the road when you had a guy like Yogi who could step up in the Iowa game and you knew who the alpha dog was, who the ball was going to. Those roles are all going to be reshuffled now. And it's not to say Indiana can't reshuffle them and get all of that figured out, but there's a big leadership void going. And Ryan, that's why I want to ask you this question. Because as I've thought about it this offseason, look, I'm as excited about next year as anybody. I think the ceiling for this IU team is really good. I think we can be a good team. But as we get further and further removed from last season, I'm getting more and more worried that we are underestimating how important the losses are for this team. I mean, even Yogi. I mean, I think people, as appreciated as Yogi is, I think we're even underestimating how big of a loss he is, how important it is to have a guy where you just know who the go-to guy is. Like, there's no mistaking it. You know who your leader is. When someone's going to step up and do something, you know it's going to be Yogi. That's got to be a new guy now, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But I also want to address a little bit more specifically Nick Zeisloft and Max Bielfeldt. Again, not guys that were with the program for 4 years, but leaders, and I thought Dan Dockich put it really well, where he said they were two guys that no matter what happened in the game, they weren't going to get rattled. And you think back to the Rutgers game when Indiana played terrible and Max Bielfeldt saved our bacon. You think about the Minnesota game where Indiana was playing terrible and Nick Zeisloft hit those 4 straight threes, including the one fading out of bounds, to save Indiana. Those stabilizing forces. Indiana didn't need them at home against Nebraska when everything's going well. But in some of those road games where you really needed the steadying hand of seniors, Indiana had that. And next year, we're not going to have those guys. Someone else is going to have to step up, in addition to the floor spacing that you got from Zeisloft and Bielfeldt, both guys who could step out, hit over 40% of their threes, and really give the rest of the guys room to operate offensively. How big of a loss are those guys, and do you think that it's being underplayed a little bit and how it'll impact Indiana next year?
I think it's a big loss, but I also think that their influence will be felt and has been felt by these other guys. I mean, they went out winning a Big Ten title, showing, the family atmosphere you want with a program, and these freshmen and sophomores are invested in that. Rob Johnson is going to be a junior, and he's invested in that. James Blackman Jr., at times, we saw him very invested, regardless of being injured. Colin Hartman is another guy who's going to be a senior. He's a leader. You've got Derek Elston still on the bench. I think he's a guy who will help with that factor as well, keeping it as a family situation. But again, these guys experience that from those guys in the upperclassmen ranks, and those guys are phenomenally important. I think that they were a stabilizing influence on the program that was sorely needed, and both guys, paid off as well. You've also got a guy in Josh Newkirk, who everybody says has been a guy, who never gets talked about, but everybody has said all great things. I mean, I haven't heard a negative thing about Newkirk since he stepped on campus. Even, his jumper isn't falling. I haven't heard a single negative thing, including little stuff like that. So, those are all guys who are capable of filling that role and stepping up and sort of just, they don't have to replace that. They just have to continue. It's already there. That team is a family. It's already there. They just have to integrate the new guys and just kind of continue the path that's been set for them. It's not hitting the reset button like it was a few years ago when all those 4 1,000-point scores went away. You've got leaders on the floor. You've got guys who've been there, and you've got guys who can perform on the floor, and you know that for sure. You're not wiping the slate clean. So I think that it's not going to be as hard as maybe we would assume, but I also think we're kind of gun-shy about it because of what happened a few years ago. So I'm actually kind of positive about it. I think that there is a leadership structure there. I don't know who's going to step up and be the guy, but I think that there are guys there who are more than capable of being that person and being the guy that sort of directs the team and leads the team.
And to be devil's advocate to my own point, Zeisloft and Bielfeldt, for all the positives they brought, they had their drawbacks too. I mean, not being overly athletic. Bielfeldt had to play a little bit out of position at 6'7", guarding bigger guys. Zeisloft was a liability defensively at times, and so you wonder if, with the additional talent and athletic ability that Indiana will have on their roster, does that compensate for some of the leadership, for some of the skills? Because obviously, all the players returning, as you said, have another year of skill development. So it's interesting. Again, these are all hypothetical questions. This is what you kick around in the offseason, and the proof will obviously be in what happens next season. So I want to get to this point about who we think is the most important player on next year's team. I think we all agree that Thomas Bryant will be the best player on next year's team and kind of the go-to guy. But is he necessarily the most important player? And we're going to get to that here in just a second, because I think we all have a little bit of a different idea about that. Before we get to that, though, I do want to let everybody who's listening know we have a book out. We actually produced a book for the first time this year. It's called Better Than Advertised, the story of the 2015-16 Hoosiers. Right now, it is in ebook form. We released it last week, and if you go to assemblycall.com/BTA, that will redirect you to the Amazon page where you can buy that book. And so you can get it. It's $2.99. It's just an ebook right now, but we had such an overwhelming response from folks and people emailing me personally saying that they would like a print version of the book, that we're putting together a print version of the book. And so we actually are working with a designer, get this, from Indianapolis. I went on to Upwork because I needed some help. I've never put a book together into book form, and I fielded all of these inquiries from folks who are interested in working on the project, and found one from Indianapolis. She even talked about, how in the pitch, it was from Indiana, and so she was really interested to work on it. And so even though she had fewer qualifications than some of the other people, I had to go with the person from Indiana, and she has proven to be great. And so we're actually going to look at the final proof tomorrow, and so we are going to be coming out with a print version of that book. No date yet for when that will be out. But if you want to get the ebook right now, again, go to assemblycall.com/BTA. It's $2.99. And it is the best way to relive last season, because we basically took our post-game emails, the emails that are only for our subscribers, we edited them a bit for context, but then put them in sequential order into this book, and you can go back and see, what was the fan reaction and analysis after the Duke game? What were we saying heading into the Notre Dame game about how important that was, and then after the Notre Dame game for what that roller coaster ride was like, and then on into the Big Ten season after the Iowa game, what was kind of the postseason prologue like after the North Carolina loss. What makes a basketball season memorable and special and so much fun to experience is the individual moments. And so that's why we put that book together. We're hoping to make it an annual thing. And so, again, if you go to assemblycall.com/BTA, you can get that book. All of the proceeds do go to support the Assembly Call, and so we greatly appreciate you picking it up. And if you have thoughts, we'd love for you to leave a review or let us know, because we want to continue to make that book better as we go forward into future seasons. All righty. Do we have breaking news? I see a head popping on here. Let's see. We may have Andy Bottoms. Andy, is that you?
I'm here. What's up?
Dude, impeccable timing. We just did the second call to action to the book, which means that we can hop right in with you and get a Bottoms line on the off season if you're ready. Not to put you on the spot seconds within joining.
Well, this did not give me much time to prepare, so that's we'll see how it goes.
All right.
Boy, I don't know. I think the biggest news certainly is Bryant and OG coming back, and the Troy stuff. I'm not sure what you guys have talked about at this point. Is really the only kind of question at this point, kind of hanging over things, which I think is from a program that has lacked stability at times in the off season in recent years. It's not a terrible place to be, I would say. So I think if I kind of rate my excitement for the upcoming season, even though it's not as close to starting as we'd all probably like, probably a little bit higher, given the events that have happened since the season got over than maybe it was immediately following. So still some questions to be answered, but definitely an exciting time. I think everybody's kind of, the more this news comes out, the bad news about some of the draft stuff dragging out is that it makes you, it kind of keeps basketball on your mind a little bit longer and makes you wish that it started sooner. But overall, I think it's been a pretty good off season in the limited time that it's been, and I guess that's what I would go with.
You echoed very much what I said for the banner moment and what the rest of us have said about the offseason. So that is good. We are all in agreement there. So we just got done. We talked a little bit about Troy. We talked about the impact of the losses on next year's team. So we want to look ahead now, and let's talk about who we all think is the most important player heading into next season. And we're going to start this again just kind of with the given that Thomas Bryant is the best player. He's the most talented player. He clearly, we all assume is going to be the go-to guy. We would think so. But is he the most important player? And so I'm going to throw out a name. We can each, give our thoughts on this. And Andy, you may hate me, but I'm going to steal the guy who you are the fan club president for, because to me, I think Robert Johnson is the most important player on next year's team. And the reason why is because of what we talked about a little bit ago with kind of the vacuum that is now there of the leadership that is gone, especially in the backcourt, because this team, the front court next year is loaded. And I mean, not only do you have Thomas Bryant and OG Anunoby and experienced guys like Colin Hartman, but also the new guys coming in like Deron Davis. The front court's going to be really good, but where is the stability and the playmaking going to come from the backcourt? Because, Ryan, you mentioned Josh Newkirk. He's a guy who's still coming off of microfracture surgery. We haven't seen him play, so reports have been good, but reports are typically good of guys who are only there in practice. It remains to be seen. James Blackman Jr. is coming off another knee injury. He's not even full participation yet. Won't be in July, so we'll have to see how he recovers. So there's a lot of possessions to be used in the backcourt and ball handling to be done, both early in games and when games get tight, and playmaking. And to me, Robert Johnson is the obvious guy who steps in to fill that role. And what makes me feel really optimistic about Robert is what we saw him doing toward the end of the year last year before he got hurt. Because before then, he had been a guy who was turning the ball over too much, a little bit inconsistent from game to game, but we really saw his game round into form. And his shooting was better, but more importantly, he was turning it over less, and he was creating. And he looked really comfortable dribbling it into the paint. He and Thomas Bryant had a great connection. I mean, it felt like at least once or twice a game, Robert was getting in there, just kind of dumping off a nice little bounce pass to Thomas Bryant. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to see next year. And is he going to replace Yogi Ferrell? No. That no one can replace what Yogi Ferrell was as a senior last year. I mean, we saw Yogi Ferrell playing the guard position at as high a level as we've seen it at Indiana in a long time. He's not going to replace that. But in terms of being a guy who can provide stability in the backcourt along with some scoring punch, as well as be a defender who can really make things hard on opposing guards, to me, Robert Johnson is the most important player, because that is the most glaring need for Indiana in terms of what they're losing and what they need to replace. and he to me is the most obvious guy who can do it. And now being a junior, being a guy who's ready to step into that role as a leader, both in terms of vocally organizing people, but also in terms of being a go-to guy, which he hasn't had to be yet. For Indiana to reach its ceiling, I think he has to step in to that role. It remains to be seen if he will, but I have a lot of confidence in him. So he, to me, is my most important player heading into next season. I will be interested to see what you guys think. And feel free, if you have the same one, feel free, but go with who you think it's going to be. Ryan, we'll go to you first.
Well, I agree with you. I think Thomas Bryant is the best player, and I also agree that I think that Robert Johnson has maybe the toughest task ahead of him, and his development will be extremely important. I have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to not be Yogi, because nobody's going to be Yogi, but he has the opportunity to be a very good player in that role. But I think the most important player is going to be OG Anunoby, based on what he can give you across the board. He's a guy that doesn't have to score 20 points a game to seriously impact a contest. His defense alone will win games for Indiana next year. I'm convinced of that. And his development as an offensive player will also, be huge this offseason. If he can be a guy who can consistently knock down shots and can take the ball, improve his ball handling, go off the dribble to the hoop, really make his game versatile offensively, I think he could be the best player on the team. In a contest with Thomas Bryant, because we've just seen how quickly he's developed over the last couple of years, going from his sophomore year of high school until now, and it's just such a rapid ascent. I mean, this is a guy who was off everybody's radar last year, and then people were talking about it being a mid-first round pick by the end of the tournament because of all the potential there.
Except for your radar.
Well, hey, you know what? Some people are just special, Jared. It's But no, I think that I just think that his ability is to help a team win, goes across the board and seeps into every aspect of the game, and I think that is the kind of thing that you need, because if one guy goes out, let's say your shooting guard goes out, well, OG can fill that role and defend on the perimeter. If Thomas Bryant gets into foul trouble, you can throw OG in the post for a little bit, maybe spread things out. Let him play defense. He can guard everybody, and he can play every position. And so if he continues to develop, I think he could be the most important player next year, and I think he will be by midseason. I think he'll be the most important player on the team.
Considering the hype on OG, would it be possible for him to be better than advertised next year?
He was better than advertised this year. I don't know about next year because we have some high expectations for him, and because we all know what he can be now that we've seen it, in full display. I mean, you got to remember, he was up against those guys from Kentucky, and he just owned that game. I mean, he was so good in that game, and he made some mistakes and had some stupid mental errors late in the season. But that's a freshman, that happens. But I just think he was so impressive all year, and continually, he and Juwan Morgan both continually got better as the season went on, and that's the mark of a great player, is they continue to improve on everything.
All right, well, we've got a vote for Robert Johnson and a vote for OG Anunoby. Who you got most important player on next year's team outside of Thomas Bryant?
Well, I told you in the email I'm going Thomas Bryant here. I think he is the most important player. He's the best, but he's also the most important. You can't tell me he's not. So
that is a cop-out answer, but we'll allow it.
I said it in the email. You never said don't use TB in the email, so I'm going to go with this. I have a nice spiel here, and you're not going to ruin this for me, Jared, all right? All right. So 2 years ago when I started on the assembly call, we needed a big man, and we got one. And I don't have the stats here, and I'm the stats guy, so I failed. But just look at the improvement from each year. I mean, obviously he made a huge impact last year. And I think with Max being gone, he's obviously has a bigger role out for him in the sophomore year, and I think he's actually up for that challenge. He makes obviously a positive impact on both ends of the floor. He's a beast on the boards. He was ranked 112th nationally with the offensive rebounding percentage, 289th defense rebounding percentage. I mean, you guys know he's good. We talked about that. But I think those numbers are only going to climb in a sophomore campaign. I really do. And especially on the boards, as he becomes stronger this offseason, he's going to be able to fight for more of those balls. And I think he is going to lead this team in rebounds on both ends, of course. And I think that obviously is very important. On top of that, we all know he can also obviously be effective on offense. He finished 4th in the country last year with like a 70% two-point percentage. He actually led the nation last year for the majority of the season in that category. And then on top of that, guys, I mean, he's going to develop more moves. Like Ryan said, this is another year for people to develop more skills, and I think he's going to add some more moves down low in the paint. I mean, we saw it towards the end of last season. He was starting to use some spins. He was starting to make some more baseline J's. I think we're going to see more of that, and his game's going to become more well-rounded. And then just on top of that, guys, and what makes him the most important player, not just the best player, Jared, but that's the energy that he brings. I mean, that energy that he brings to the floor alone makes him the most important player because it's infectious. Other players feed off that energy. And with another year to mature, I think he's going to learn how to actually keep those emotions in check a little bit more. When we kind of saw him get a little too upset at some calls, I think he's going to kind of limit those. And I think that energy alone, like I said, makes him the most important player. And so, Jared, you don't know. I mean, you think that, he might be the best, maybe the most important. So let me ask you, if there's going to be one player who is currently on the roster and say something happened and he would be off the team by October, and that would make and what player, how do I want to phrase this real quick? All right, so what player, if he wasn't here, would we miss the most? And it's Thomas Bryant, and that's what makes him the most important player.
Yes, and there's no debate. I mean, Thomas Bryant is the most important player on next year's team, and we're going to allow that because you did such a good job breaking it down. Also, Will, I like how you're holding your own more now. It really shows your progression, from your first season now heading into your third season with the assembly call. This is a lot like what you see from a freshman to a junior, with the Hoosiers. I feel like your first season you would have been a little bit more timid, back down when I challenged you. Here you came right back at us. That's what we need to see from guys like Robert Johnson this year.
Hey, I don't like it, Jared. Don't encourage him. Sit down when the adults are talking, son.
I'm an adult now, Ryan. Okay, I'm a big boy. I have like 20 gray hairs. I'm an adult.
Alrighty, so let's go over to Andy Bottoms now and get his answer to this question. And we could have breaking news. Is Andy ready to switch his fan club membership to another member of the backcourt?
No, definitely not. I mean, I'm going to go with somebody else just for the sake of a different answer here. I do think Robert Johnson is really important, but since you took that, I'm going to let it go. Before I start, though, I want to make sure I did not miss the part of the show where Ryan breaks down the Zach Mettenberger signing by the Chargers. I didn't miss that, right? We've still
no, we're getting
to come. I'm not the one who brings up football in these chats. That's always Will with his Jay Cutler comparisons. I never bring football. Trust me, nothing I don't want to bring up the Chargers ever. It'll just get me mad.
All right. Well, this worked well then. Good. I'm actually going to say James Blackman Jr. I think when we look at, I'm sure you guys touched on this a little bit with the guys that are being lost, with Yogi and Zysloft and even Max to a certain extent. This team lost some good outside shooters, and one way to replace those is with a guy who we already know can shoot the ball. And I think there's a lot of things about James that are going to be critical to look at this season. One of those obviously his health and how he comes back from the knee injury. Another of those is again, what can he do from a shooting perspective to help keep the floor spread? Does he become more of a catch and shoot guy? And some of those kinds of things. And then obviously the defense, which everybody has talked about at great length since he went out last year and what that all means. And so, I think if you kind of look at something that could really swing the balance of the season, if he comes back, not asking him to be an all Big Ten caliber defender, but if he commits himself more on that end of the floor, if he comes back and displays the the shooting stroke that he did as a freshman, and even scored well in the early season last year, if he can do those things and even take some of the ball handling load that's kind of been talked about, as it feels like Robert Johnson seems like or Newkirk may seem like the heir apparent to some of the point guard duties, but can he play some of that role as well? So I think from a versatility standpoint, he can do a lot of things in the backcourt that now maybe is where there are more question marks. If you think about where we were last year at the end of the season, number of scholarship guards that were healthy by the end of the season was a pretty low number. So you take away two of the guys that were there at the end of the season, and all of a sudden the backcourt becomes a real key area for this team. So I think in addition to Robert Johnson, James Blackman is definitely a guy who, if he's playing well and asserting himself on both ends of the floor, has a really good opportunity to both improve his own stock, and what that means for the fact that he put his name in the NBA draft and all those kinds of things aside, can really do a lot for the team as well.
So, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and tweet us at Assembly Call. Who do you think is the most important player next year? And feel free to add Thomas Bryant if you want to, but if you're going to choose Thomas Bryant, maybe add a second person, since that one seems so obvious. But let us know who you think it is, and maybe it's Colin Hartman, the senior and the elder statesman on next year's team. Maybe you think it's a new guy, one of the guys we're going to be talking about with Ryan here in just a second. But let us know. Tweet us at Assembly Call, as we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And Andy, you expressed a comment here in the chat, a concern that's going to lead us into these scouting reports quite nicely. And you have a concern about what may happen or what will happen when Thomas Bryant is off the floor. And obviously him learning to play without fouling, learning to play longer minutes at a high level is going to be very important because there's no proven guy behind him.
Yeah, I just think we kind of had some of those questions last year, quite honestly, because we didn't really know, what Bielefeld was going to be able to bring in that role, and so hopefully somebody else will be able to answer those questions this year. But it got to the point last year that on occasions that Bryant did get in foul trouble, I don't think anybody was worried, concerned in any way, when Max would start coming onto the floor in those scenarios. So, it's really who steps in and takes that role. Juwan Morgan, while undersized, kind of showed the ability to do some of those things from a defense and rebounding standpoint. So I think he's a potential contributor there. OG with his versatility could probably give you some minutes in that area. Colin Hartman, very experienced playing the center position from a couple years ago, so maybe that's an option. Hopefully not, as most of us would say from having lived through that season. And maybe it's some of the new guys who step into that role, and it probably makes for a good transition to some of the analysis that Ryan's done on those. But I do think that's one area where you look. There's a lot of depth on this team. And a lot of guys were excited about. That's kind of one area in terms of having a true backup post guy that will be a big question. Because with Max, at least, even though we didn't know what we were getting necessarily, you definitely knew there was some experience there and had been through some of the rigors of Big Ten play and was ready for that. So, if there's any area outside of the guys that we mentioned and filling those roles, that's one that I think is at least something to keep an eye on as the season starts, which I keep talking about like it's going to happen in 2 weeks, which it's not, unfortunately.
Hey, by the way, our good friend Hoosier Artifacts, it's at IU Artifacts on Twitter, just chimed in and said Colin Hartman will be a key figure. His leadership gone with Yogi will be a necessity. Totally agree with that. And by the way, make sure that you follow at IU Artifacts. It's one of my favorite Twitter accounts to follow, because they post some of the most random IU stuff. I mean, from all the way back to the 20s. It's really, really cool. There's always some little blast from the past there, and obviously we Hoosiers love our tradition. So at IU Artifacts, give that Twitter account a follow if you haven't yet. Ryan, this is the perfect segue into what you wanted to talk about, because when we talk about backing up Thomas Bryant, the first guy who comes to mind is Deron Davis, a guy who's 6'9", 6'10", somewhere in that range, known as a pretty good defender, set the all-time record in the state of Colorado for block shots, and he seems to be the guy who will be the backup for Thomas Bryant, unless, of course, he works his way into a bigger starting lineup and you somehow have the two of them playing together. But let's start your scouting reports of the new guys with Deron Davis, the highest profile of the recruits coming in, and how you think he'll be able to fare in his first season in Bloomington.
Yeah, I threw this gauntlet down on OG Anunoby last year and it paid off, so I'm going to do it again this year for Deron Davis. I think he's the most underrated player nationally. And he's a four-star, highly regarded guy, but I have no idea how he was not a McDonald's All-American. I have no idea how, he wasn't a five-star. I've watched this guy play a lot. He is a stud. As you said, 6'9", 6'10". Tom Crean believes he's going to wind up being 7 foot. I don't think Tom Crean's a doctor, so I don't know how he came up with that, but, he thinks he's still growing. But I do. I think he's the best, most underrated player nationally. I will say this too, and this is going to get me in trouble with people, but as far as being an all-around basketball player, I think Deron Davis is a better all-around basketball player than Thomas Bryant was at the same time last year, entering his freshman year. Bryant was a much better offensive player, but Davis adds so much more versatility that, after Bryant went through the offseason conditioning program and went through all of the strength conditioning stuff, he became a better player. He was less stiff, he was more mobile, and he was more athletic. Before all that happened, I think Deron Davis right now is better than that version of Thomas Bryant. Davis is solid on offense, but he's not a game breaker like Thomas Bryant right now. He can be, though. He's a two-time state champion, so he's a guy who's won. And while that sounds cheesy, he's a winner. I mean, he just is. He's a guy who gets it done and is willing to do what it takes to win games. He's very aggressive, willing defender, especially coming from the weak side. That's why he's so good at blocks. But the thing that I like about him is he's not great at he's not just like a super athlete, and that's why he's a good defender. He's actually a great at anticipating things and seeing plays develop and then making the move to make a great defensive play. So he understands basketball. He understands the movements on the floor and where he needs to be to help out. So it's not just pure athleticism that leads to blocks like we saw a lot with Troy Williams. He's not a great shooter, but he shows a very clean release, good release on his shot, can certainly show flash range out to the three-point line. It's not consistent yet, but that's something they're going to have to work on, and if anybody can develop a shooter, it's the coaches at Indiana right now.
Shot doctor, Tim Buckley.
Yeah, he's a decent finisher around the hoop. Obviously, in the Big Ten, he's going to need to get bigger and stronger, but he's a solid finisher right now, and that should only improve as he adds some muscle and some of that athleticism that we saw added to Thomas Bryant in the offseason. I don't think he'll start next year. I think that he will contribute a lot, and he will be Thomas Bryant's backup. But I think that he will play a significant amount, and I think they'll be on the floor together too, but I think he'll be specifically positioned as the guy who comes in when Thomas needs that first break, and then they'll both be in at times together because they do different things. Davis can step out on the floor. He's not a specific back-to-the-basket guy, and he shows great sort of movement around the hoop. He's a very smooth athlete, for his size, he's a very smooth guy. And he's a very good rebounder, but it's because of positioning, not because, again, he's just an explosive athlete. So I'd like to see him get more aggressive on the boards. But, again, those are all things that are fixable and improvable just with experience. So I love this player.
You know who your scouting report sounds like? It sounds like a poor man's Alan Henderson. And a poor man's Alan Henderson is a hell of a basketball player.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call him poor man's Alan Henderson. I think that this is a guy who can develop into that type of player. I love Deron Davis. I don't know how as I said, I don't know how he was not rated higher. And I love what he brings to the table. I think he's a perfect recruit for this team coming up. So, yeah, any questions on this guy, you can feel free to ask because I've watched a lot of him.
Yeah, so one follow-up here before we move on to the next guy. The reason I was hesitant to kind of throw him in the mix for that concern that I brought up earlier was a little bit of what you touched on later, where I always got the impression that he was more of a face-up guy and could step out and shoot a little bit more. That was a little bit bigger part of his game. I mean, is that a fair assessment, you think? Or I guess maybe better to say, like, do you think it's a huge leap for him to be able to step into a little bit more of a post role, particularly more like from a defense and rebounding standpoint? I don't know that that's as important in IU's offense, from an offensive standpoint, but is he, how ready is he to step in on the defense and rebounding side of things?
Obviously, he needs to bulk up, and that's true of any freshman big man who enters the Big Ten. We all know how brutal that conference can be. We got lucky last year. We already had a guy bulked up in Max Bielfeldt come in and help out. But you're right. His game does have some more face-up in it. I have a buddy who coached against him in high school, and the problem these days with guys his size, Noah Vonleh is one of them, is they all want to be Kevin Durant when they're that size. Davis is not that guy. He is a post player, and he can step out on the floor. He can take a screen. He can screen and roll. He can screen and pop. But he is more of a post guy. Now, his post moves need to be developed. He's not as advanced offensively, as I said, as Thomas Bryant was. But working with a guy like Thomas Bryant and sort of parroting and mimicking him will help him tremendously. Defensively, I think he's good enough instinctually to actually play that role right now. Again, he needs to get bigger to take that pounding. But at the same time, if he's only playing 20 minutes a game for you and he's in there mixing it up with those guys, I think he'll be fine if he adds some bulk and just gets the experience.
Alrighty, so that's Deron Davis, a huge recruit for Indiana to get, a guy that they had been obviously targeting since he was in 8th grade, and obviously incredible depth and potential for the future. Let's go to the backcourt now, because actually a guy who on some recruiting lists is ranked higher than Deron Davis, much to Ryan's chagrin, because he thinks Deron Davis should be ranked a lot higher, but is Curtis Jones, a guard who is somewhat in the James Blackman Jr. mold a little bit, just in terms of kind of how he looks. They don't play exactly alike. Cujo a little bit more athletic, and yes, he does go by Cujo, which is a great nickname, an unbelievable nickname. So, Ryan, what is Curtis Jones going to be bringing to Bloomington next year? And is he a guy who we can count on to be a rotation piece for a backcourt that is going to need some scoring punch?
Yeah, I think he's definitely going to be in the mix as well, sort of in the mold of what Robert Johnson and not James Blackman, because they started as freshmen, but I think that it's if you're not starting them what they would have been, that sixth-man, seventh-man area. The thing I like about Jones, he played with Bryant at Huntington Prep. They know each other well. He knows what he's getting when he's got that big man on the floor. He's going to be willing to distribute to a big man because he knows how easy that makes everything for everybody else. He's a good athlete, a good finisher. He's very skinny right now. Last time I saw him listed was 6'4", 175. He's not a point guard. He's a combo guard. So he needs to bulk up if he's going to be going to the rim. And we saw James Blackman Jr. struggle with that his freshman year, going to the rim, not strong, just going up to lay it up and getting a lot of his shots blocked, getting a lot of contact and not finishing through it. You can't do that in the Big Ten. So I would like to see him bulk up more. He is, as you said, more athletic than James Blackman Jr. for sure. He has solid vision as a passer. He's improving in that area, and I've watched video from his junior and senior year, and he's certainly gotten better, and it's certainly something he's worked on, but he's not there yet. He's a good ball handler. He loves there's a little hesitation move he does that he just repeats, and he loves to pull up off of that or cross people over. He's a good ball handler, but he's not at a point guard level yet. He's still got to work on that as well. And with Indiana not having a pure ball handler right now, that's kind of a concern. You'd like to have him be a little further advanced. He's sometimes his shot. He's a good shooter, as everybody's talked about with him. There's a couple little things that bother me about his shot, though, and I think that Tim Buckley will get a hold of him and change. It sometimes takes him too long to get his shot off. His feet, when he jumps, are really close together, and you want them about shoulder width apart. And so it's a really weak position to be in when you shoot. But the things that are the most important on a three-point shot, on a jump shot, are the release and the rotation, and his are outstanding. So if they can just work out those little kinks and get him into a better position, get his release a little quicker, he should be a phenomenal scorer for Indiana for a few years. And so I really like what he brings to the table. Obviously, there's a reason he's ranked so high, and a lot of schools wanted him. So I think that those are the two marquee players, in Davis and Jones, and I think that they will definitely be contributing next year. I don't think either is going to start right off the bat, but I think that both guys have the chance to be big-time contributors for Indiana.
So I think the other guy of the incoming players who has the biggest chance to be a contributor early on is the junior college transfer Freddie McSwain, who signed late. And I know he's a guy. I watched a couple highlight videos, which obviously is essentially the equivalent of Scala Bissiere looking good working out against a chair, and then everybody thinking he can play basketball against actual humans. So, what have you seen from McSwain that is a bit more well-rounded in analysis than just some of these things where he's making really athletic plays and things like that, which obviously are exciting and those kinds of things. But what do you think is a reasonable expectation from him going in?
Just so people know, McSwain, 6'6", 220, profile sort of as a power forward because he's not going to play on the perimeter. He doesn't have the ball handling or the shooting ability to do that. In fact, I would be fine if he never shot the ball outside of like 10 feet. There are a couple times in highlight videos, as you said, and other videos where I watched full game tape of him where he'll come down and just hit a three perfectly, and you'll be like, wow, I didn't expect that. And then next time down, he'll miss the rim and hit the other side of the backboard. I mean, it's really awful. He's super athletic. He's a guy who's going to mix it up defensively. He's super, bouncy, I guess is a good word for him, and disruptive on both ends of the floor. He needs more discipline with his movements defensively. He kind of like goes up and swings wildly, but he draws a lot of fouls on the offensive end, which I like. The problem is he's not a great free throw shooter. Needs to work on that. His jumper, as I said, needs a ton of work. I mean, it's a disaster right now. But he's a strong finisher at the rim, and he can be a guy who could get a lot of garbage points for you if you need it. And I think that it never hurts to add athleticism to your program, especially if you're not counting on him to start or be a guy who's going to get 30 minutes. So I don't have a problem with an athletic guy coming in and just mixing it up and going after rebounds. I think he's a good rebounder. A lot of it is positional, though. He's actually surprisingly a very good positional rebounder. I don't see him getting rebounds because of his athleticism. I think that helps, but I think he genuinely is a very good positional rebounder. So, yeah, I think he's a piece where he can help, and it's another guy to add to the mix who's athletic and can get some things done and won't hurt you. But yeah, I think that he's a guy who. We should temper our expectations. I think he's going to be an energy guy who can come in and mix things up on the interior.
Yeah. Alrighty. And I wanted to mention too. You talked about.
And I think.
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Oh no, just one thing to add on him. I think I heard the interview you did with his junior college coach and some of the other stuff you've read about him. I mean, it seems like a really likable kid who's excited about this opportunity and looking to make the most of it, and the resources and things like that he's going to get from IU seem like things that could really benefit somebody like him if he tries to play within himself early on, because he does sound like he can bring some things to the table and will grow in his couple years at IU, and seems like a perfect kind of glue guy off the bench that can come in and do a little bit of everything. So I think in that regard it's exciting and not a guy who's going to be asked to come in and do a whole lot right away. So if he can focus in on the few things that he does really well, I think for sure he could make an impact off the bench, and we know Green's going to play a lot of guys, and he's definitely going to be one that fits into that mix, I think, and with a role that could expand over the course of the year, maybe in a similar way to what Juwan and OG did, just in terms of how their minutes might grow over the season as they prove themselves.
Yeah, I gotta say, this class. I mean, you said that he seems like a really good kid. This class, all these guys seem really focused on, coming in and being part of the team, and not, I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna, my goal is to be an All-American. They're coming in and they want to get better at basketball and they want to contribute, and I think that's such a great attitude to have, and I think that it speaks to sort of what we saw last year with, a guy like Anunoby coming in and playing small minutes, but then building his role in and proving he can contribute, and a guy like Morgan as well. And I think these kids are seeing that and saying, well, they got better over the season because they started slowly. They weren't thrown into the mix. And I think that's what we're going to see with this class. I think we're going to see guys who come in and contribute over time, but aren't necessarily going to jump off the page the first week with a 30-point performance or anything like that. You're going to see steady growth. And I think that's the right way to build a championship program, not constantly replenishing freshmen, and having them all leave. I like having that long, steady growth. Graduate these guys, get them out into the world, and have them be good representatives of your program for a long time.
Oh, it's more the Michigan State model, and it goes back to what I was talking about in the banner moment, where it feels like things are stabilizing a little bit. And, it's like last year, heading into last year, we needed Thomas Bryant. We were desperate for a guy like Thomas Bryant to fill this gaping, massive hole, to have a good team. And heading into this year, look, Ryan, you talked about it. I mean, Deron Davis, Curtis Jones, both, really, 4-star recruits. And they're not being expected to jump right in and play huge minutes, because you can construct a really good starting lineup without those guys. When you got Robert Johnson, James Blackman Jr., Colin Hartman, OG Anunoby, Juwan Morgan, Thomas Bryant. When you have all of these guys already there, they can come in, and we can be a little bit more patient with them. And it's another sign of the stability of the program, getting it to where we want it. And now you add these guys, and they can really kind of take you to the next level instead of just adding them to keep you, treading water or keep you afloat. And that's a great place for the program to be in. So let's talk about the other two guys coming in. They are less heralded, but still guys that have some specific skills that even if they're not as useful this year, and not to say they won't be, goodness knows, enough people prejudged OG Anunoby last year, talking about him as a redshirt, that we should know we can't prejudge these guys. But obviously not as much expected from Devontae Green and Grant Gilon. What do you have on them, Ryan?
Well, Gilon is he's Indiana boy. He's exactly what you expect from an Indiana boy. He's from Crown Point. He's about a 6'6", maybe 200-pound shooter. He needs to obviously add some weight. They all do. He's a tall shooter, great release, very deep range, good basketball IQ. It reminds me a lot of a Colin Hartman type guy. He makes those quote winning plays, but and I think that he was a 4-year varsity player in high school, which is rare in Indiana. We all know that at a bigger school. But he's also the kind of glue guy you kind of need to mix in on a roster, and I really like that we're going after that kind of guy, not based on star rankings. He may need a year before he contributes, but I think Crean saw last year that what happened, not this past season, but the season before, when you don't have three-point shooters, or I guess it was, it's been 2-3 years ago, where when you don't have guys who can hit three-pointers, it can really hurt your team. And regardless of what else they can do, you need to have that dangerous guy on the perimeter. And he's certainly that. I think he can give you more than that, but I think that's going to be his role early, is going to be just being that outside shooter who's tall, who can get his shot off over anybody, and then can also be kind of the Colin Hartman guy who will dive on the floor and get you a rebound that you didn't think you had a chance at getting, or making a great pass on the interior when you think he's just going to, go for a layup or something like that. So I think that he'll be in a great position as a freshman to sit behind Colin Hartman and watch him play, because I think they're very similar guys. As far as Devontae Green, he's from Long Island. He's a 6'1", 165-pound point guard, very small. Should add some weight. A lot of people have him listed as like 6'2", 6'3". I don't buy that for a second. He's quick and athletic. He can dunk at 6'1" pretty easily, so I don't think you'll see him do it in the game very often. It might be the Robert Johnson thing, where occasionally maybe he'll get up there, but he's the younger brother of Danny Green, the Spurs outside shooter who went to North Carolina. He's a driver. He's listed as a shooting guard, combo guard. I think that Crean is seeing him as a point guard. He's very quick. He doesn't have the ball handling ability to be a point guard at the next level yet, but that's something that can improve, and it needs to improve. When he gets in the interior, he has great vision at getting post players the ball. And if he doesn't have anything there, he's a shorter guy. When he goes in among the trees, he looks to kick it out, looks to move the ball around. He's a very good free throw shooter. I think he was up to 87% this year. And also he makes a lot of three-pointers. I think last summer in his summer circuit he shot 44% from three. I don't like his release, though. I think it needs to be ironed out. Very good release and rotation, as with Curtis Jones, but he double clutches on his shot, and I don't like seeing that, because it makes it last longer, makes it easier to block, makes it easier to close out on. So I think Tim Buckley will have to work with that. Work on that with him. And he's also an incredibly willing defender. He said his goal is to be the best defender in the country. So having a guy like that is very important. Have him, work on being that guy. I think we'll see him next year. I really wouldn't expect anyone to redshirt. I think we'll see him next year in limited stretches. And same with Gilon. Gilon might redshirt, but I don't. That just doesn't seem to be Crean's MO with guys. If he brings you in, he wants you to at least be in the rotation and be playing. So all 5 guys could contribute next year. I'm really excited to see what they do when they get on campus.
Well, and it's nice to hear that about Devontae when it comes to defense. And that's the thing about next year's team. I mean, look, for 2 straight years, we've had a team that was really heavily offensive focused. And you go back to that 2013-14 team that you referenced, Ryan, that team couldn't shoot almost at all, and really didn't have much guard play outside of Yogi, and became a very defensive-oriented team where it was painful to watch them offensively. And now these last couple seasons, the offense has obviously been elite, and the defense has been up and down. Now last year it was certainly better during Big Ten play, but it really seems like next year the offense may take a bit of a step back, especially with Yogi gone, with a lot of guys in new roles. But I think the hope for Indiana next year to reach its potential is that the defense takes the next step up, and if it's not good, could even be great, could even be a top 20 type defense possibly, if Thomas Bryant can get better at defending the post. When you've got guys like Robert Johnson now, as your lead defender out on the perimeter, guys like Juwan Morgan, OG Anunoby playing more minutes, Devin Davis, who has the pedigree of a very good defender, this team has a chance to be very, very good defensively. And obviously it's been a couple of years since we've gone into the season confident on the defensive end, and seeing what a guy like Josh Newkirk brings to the table, and then how James Blackman Jr.'s mentality might be different, will go a long way toward dictating that as well. But it's certainly interesting to think about, and this team will play differently, certainly, than they have the next 2 years, but that's pretty much a given the fact that the guy who's had the ball in his hands the most, Yogi Ferrell, is gone. there's going to be a bit of a change, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. Alrighty, quick reminder here. Thank you to everybody who's watching us. We appreciate it. And if you're listening on the podcast, thank you too. One quick reminder, go to assemblycall.com/BTA. Check out the book, Better Than Advertised, the story of the 2015-16 Indiana Hoosiers. You can get the ebook right now. It's $2.99. Again, all of those proceeds go to help support the Assembly Call, and right now they're going to help us get the print version out. It is not cheap to do, but we're very excited to do it because a lot of you have asked for it. And plus, it's just going to be kind of cool to see a book that we all wrote and had a hand in physically, like in our hands. That'll be a really cool thing, and we're really excited to share that with you. And certainly we will let you guys know as soon as that is ready for ordering, because anytime that you want to go back and relive some great memory from the 2015-16 season, you will be able to do it when you have Better Than Advertised. Alrighty, let's go to some final thoughts, fellas, and yeah, we'll do that. Mr. DeWitt, we will go to you first.
All right, I'll start off our last call segment with a name that you just mentioned that wasn't mentioned before in the show, and that was Juwan Morgan. People are probably wondering, how's he doing with his shoulder? Well, I'm just going to base it off my experience where he should be. I think he had his surgery 2 weeks-ish after mine, so we should be roughly on the same page here. Pretty much his range of motion should be fairly getting back to kind of normal situations. Personally, I can lift my arm up. It gets a little tight, a little bit sore, but not too bad. And then pretty much just strengthening the muscles around it, because when you get the surgery, it just kind of gets real weak. So I'm sure Juwan's hard into rehab right now. So I think it's probably going to be until June, July, until he can actually get back there on the court and start to be back to his basketball self. But yeah, just figured to do an update for my last call today.
Hey, and get ready for Juwan Morgan point guard next year. We heard about him playing point guard in practice and saw him doing it a few times in games. Hey, there's an opportunity at the point guard position, and frankly, he didn't look that bad doing it, but in very limited opportunity. So we'll see how that goes next year. Andy, while Ryan continues to catch his breath, we'll go to you for last call next.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the book. I'm sure you guys talked about it a little bit so far, but it was definitely a cool experience to kind of go back and relive parts of the season, even parts that didn't really seem like they would be all that fun to relive. But we did this pretty much right in the aftermath of the season winding up, and it was definitely cool to go back and kind of relive some of the journey, and some of the bad parts didn't seem quite so bad when you knew how things ended up. So that was enjoyable as well. I did see the other night, apparently ESPNU was rerunning some games from this season, and the IU Duke game was one of them. For what reason, I have no idea. I did not even flip to the game in any way, shape, or form, but definitely a cool experience. Hope those of you that have bought it have enjoyed it. It was fun to put together and relive and try to summarize the thoughts about the team in a way that we hadn't done before. So definitely a cool experience. And other than that, like I said, been an exciting off season for us. Nice to get everybody back together. Although it was also super enjoyable to be Kirk Haston and Jordan Hulse. So. Ryan certainly on the heels of that, no slouch in any way whatsoever, given the analysis that we were provided with tonight. So I was glad to have everybody back. We'll wait on the Mettenberger hot takes for next time, I guess.
And Ryan, please allow me to roll out the verbal red carpet for you to come in for your last call.
Thanks. You guys
do
haven't
we have
seen
theme music or anything like that we could start to
You guys
roll
haven't
out?
seen it, but Jared's been calling me a diva all night. So in our group chat,
Not unwarranted based on what I've seen.
guys, just yeah. You know what? I'm gonna do a spinoff. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go start my own spinoff.
The Assembly Fall, the demise of Ryan Phillips.
Yeah, you guys don't want to Timberlake and NSYNC this thing. It didn't end up well for the other guys. Yeah, I did like being a guest on the show this week, I guess, is the thing. But no, I think it's, as we mentioned off the top, let's get off that. Let's just move on.
I'm just trying to figure out who the rest of us are, like who's Patrick and who's
I don't even know the rest of the guys' names, and that should be a lesson to all of you. So I think that we started the show off talking about how it's been a smooth off season, and this is sort of what it's supposed to feel like when you're a top program. And I just think that that's the message we're getting right now. Is these guys? I mean, yeah, we're losing players to the NBA draft, but that's what happens when you're a top program. We're not having guys leave early to leave after their freshman year either. Guys want to stick around and be a part of this. And then you're bringing in a lot of talent that could really help and will be good college basketball players. And I think that that's the model you want to set. You want to be doing this every year. You want to be replenishing your roster every year and letting guys go. And it's sad when those guys leave and you do lose something, but that's part of the excitement is the other guys stepping up and filling those roles. So I love that we are going to see elements of this past year's team next year, but it's going to be a new team, and it's going to be new guys stepping up, and it won't be the same as the 2016 Big Ten champs. But hey, these new guys have a chance to forge that legacy, and it's guys who were involved in that championship. It's not a clean slate, as we said before. So that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to gradually, some guys get pushed out because of, they lose their eligibility. New guys come in, and he just kind of goes along like a train. It's not a complete stop and redo everything. Kentucky's been doing that. And who beat Kentucky this year? It's
Indiana.
Right. I almost forgot about that. Anyway, so that's my wrap up. I think it's been a great offseason, and I think that Indiana's headed in a great direction, and I think that we should all be really excited about the future.
I agree, and that is the biggest takeaway that we should all have from the offseason so far. And, of course, I'm going to spend some time knocking on wood, as Ryan accused me of jinxing the Hoosiers' great offseason so far, so we're going to hope that that has not happened. But so far, so good. Hopefully that continues. And I just want to end the show by wishing Yogi Ferrell the best of luck, as he did not make the NBA Combine, but he's doing plenty of workouts. I think I just saw a tweet that he's heading to Phoenix, just had his workout with the Clippers, I believe. And so I'm still holding out hope, feeling good that someone is going to give Yogi a chance in the second round. I hope it's my current home city, the Dallas Mavericks, so I can come see him play. But I just hope Yogi gets in a good situation with a coach who understands how to utilize his skills, because I think Yogi proved himself to be a leader, to be a winner. He's a guy who can score. He showed that he can defend. And I think there's a spot for him as a really good backup point guard in the NBA right now, and maybe to develop into a starter as he develops. And I look at a guy like J.J. Barea as a guy that Yogi can be like, about a similar size, can come in and provide instant offense, get into the lane with the best of them, and that's the kind of role that I think he can carve out. And so I'm hoping some team gives him a chance. They certainly should, because Yogi showed us over his 4 years at Indiana that he will do whatever it takes to win. He'll continue to get better. And he's just a guy that makes other players around him better because of his leadership, because of his work ethic, and because of his willingness to do what it takes to win. So somebody, hopefully the Mavericks, but maybe the Pacers, someone like that, keep him close to home. Someone take a chance on Yogi. You will not be sorry. All right, everybody, we appreciate you taking a chance on us here at the Assembly Call. If this is your first time listening, thank you. If you have been listening for a long time, thank you. Either way, we will continue to put out new episodes every other Wednesday during the off season, and then we'll typically have something in between there, whether it's a classic episode, whether it's our new intern show, The Hoosier Life. But we want to try and stay in your podcast feed once a week, because there's just plenty of stuff to talk about during the off season, and it helps us pass the time so we get to the season quicker, which is what we are all ready to do. All right, everybody, have a great night, a great day, and we will talk to you on the next episode of the Assembly Call.